What's up guys, I'm going to be doing several videos this week talking about the greatness of Oleksandr Usyk and talking in detail about just how great his resume is and how he compares to other great fighters. In this video I'm going to talk about why he is the greatest cruiserweight of all time. Now, after the first Fury fight, I talked about it in this video, comparing him to Evander Holyfield, but I'm going to talk about it in more detail here. Now, for those who don't know why we're just going to be talking about Holyfield's resume in detail, comparing it to Usyk, is because nobody else really compares. Because if you look at all of the cruiserweight champions in the history of boxing, very few fighters actually unified the titles, let alone become undisputed. Jean-Marc Mormec was one, and he did have a pretty good run, but 2 wins over Virgil Hill, who was well past his best. I mean, people were saying Virgil Hill was washed up after Roy Jones knocked him out. Oleksandr Gurov, okay contender. Dale Brown, I mean, whatever. Wayne Braithwaite, that was a very good win. And he lost to O'Neal Bell in a bid to become undisputed. And he won it back in the rematch, as you can see here. Then he got slept by David Haye. So O'Neal Bell is the only other guy to become undisputed besides Holyfield and Usyk. Going to David Haye's resume, who always liked to talk about how he was undisputed cruiserweight champion, even though he never was. He did have a good run, but the depth is not there, not even close to Oleksandr Usyk or Holyfield. As a contender, you can see here wins over washed-up Arthur Williams and Glenn Kelly. Oleksandr Gurov, that was an okay win for a contender. And Jekov Fragomeni eventually became champion himself. That was a good win. And wins over Enzo Maccarinelli and Mormec to win and unify the division, except for the IBF, but that was a good run. Then you have O'Neal Bell, who, like I said, for a very short time was undisputed, but his career highlight was that undisputed title win. Other than that, he really didn't do anything. Wins over Dale Brown, Ezra Sellers, Calvin Davis. Again, Arthur Williams was well and truly washed up. Nothing special there. And lastly, of course, you did have guys like Thomas Adamek and James Toney and Vasily Girov, but these guys don't have the unifications or the depth, either of those two, compared to Holyfield and Usyk. So if you look at the real deal, let's look at his resume in detail. His first title win was against Dwight Muhammad Qawi, who became a Hall of Fame fighter, partly because of what he achieved at light heavyweight, where he did lose to Michael Spinks, no shame there, and he did do a pretty good job at cruiserweight, but he was only champion for a short time, and one of his title wins out of 2 was against Leon Spinks. So, yeah, nothing special there. He loses to Holyfield, very, very close decision. One of my favorite fights of all time. That fight, Evander Holyfield versus Dwight Muhammad Qawi, 1986. I love watching that fight back. And he ended up losing in the rematch a few years later, when he was basically an old man. And again, good win, very, very skilled fighter, very impressive fighter in general, but Dwight Muhammad Qawi is overtaken by some of the guys on Usyk's resume, which I'll get to shortly. He defended his title against Henry Tillman, who was an Olympic gold medalist who famously beat Mike Tyson in the amateurs, but didn't achieve anything in the professionals. You can see here Holyfield unified against Ricky Parkey, who did beat a good fighter to become world champion, but he also had 4 losses before he became that, and Ricky Parkey didn't do anything to really cement himself as one of the top fighters in the division, aside from having one good victory to become world champion. Other than that, he was just a champion who nobody remembers really. No offense to the guy. Ozzy Ocasio, I mean, that was really a low-level win for Holyfield. Not his fault, but Ocasio was a guy who didn't achieve anything special at heavyweight. He was just lunch meat for a prime Larry Holmes. And when he moved down to cruiserweight, he beat a bunch of no-names to become world champion. And then he lost clearly to Holyfield. And then he just lost since. So Ocasio, nothing special. Qawi, I've already said he was an old man and hadn't really been doing anything big when that rematch happened. Then you have Carlos de Leon here. That's where Holyfield became undisputed champion. De Leon did win the title 3 times, but it was the same title he kept losing, so he never unified with the other champions. And again, before he fought Holyfield, he had 4 losses. And he beat okay fighters to become world champion, but he hadn't done anything to really cement himself as the elite of the division, other than he held the world title at the time. whereas all of the guys on Oleksandr Usyk's resume did more to cement themselves as established world champions around the time Usyk beat them, or they went on to achieve more after Usyk fought them. Because Oleksandr Usyk first won his world title when he defeated Krzysztof Glowacki, and Glowacki at the time had upset the second longest cruiserweight champion in history behind Johnny Nelson, Marco Huck, who was a dangerous puncher at cruiserweight, and Glowacki beat him, no question. Then Glowacki defended his world title against Steve Cunningham, who was past his best, but Cunningham is always in shape, and Glowacki was in his prime. He was an established world champion, and Usyk beat him in his own country. Tabiso Machunu, he was a good contender, very skilled, very athletically gifted, but doesn't have the greatest resume of all time, so you could compare Machunu to the likes of Ocasio and Henry Tillman. Then you've got Michael Hunter, who has a much better skill set than what his resume suggests, because his resume was okay at heavyweight, and I say was, I mean he hasn't retired yet, but he's probably going to soon. He didn't do anything spectacular at cruiserweight in terms of becoming world champion, but if you look at Michael Hunter as a fighter, his skill set is legit. I mean, I would favour Michael Hunter to beat lots of the top cruiserweights nowadays, and he would give all of the champions a handful. He was very skilled, very athletic, a very skilled boxer who could attack you, and he wasn't just a guy who would be pitter-patter, he was dangerous when he attacked you. I mean, somewhat reminiscent of Michael Spinks, a dangerous boxer who could fight you if he wanted to. So that was a really good win. I would definitely say Michael Hunter was better than Tillman, Ocasio. I would say maybe he's on the similar level to Ricky Parkey. I mean, Michael Hunter is still the only guy who has defeated Martin Bakole at heavyweight, which has aged beautifully. So yeah, Hunter was a very good win. Marco Huck was well past his best, and Usyk did what he was expected to do. You could say Huck was on a similar level to what Kawi was when Holyfield fought him in the rematch. Then you have the big ones for Oleksandr Usyk. Maris Bradis in Latvia. Bradis, and I'm just going to say it right now, is a better win than a prime Dwight Muhammad Kawi. Bigger, stronger, and more skilled than Kawi. He's not just a high-level pressure fighter who has better hand skills and just better all-around skills than Kawi. He could also box a little bit, Bradis can. And we've seen what Bradis has done in his career. To earn his title shot, he beat fellow undefeated contenders Simon Valili and Olirananu Dorodola. He beat Marco Huck, who still had some left at that time. Mike Perez was a very skilled Cuban fighter, and we all know how the Americans love to hype up Cubans because of how they hype up Luis Ortiz, and Bradis beat him without question, showed a lot of boxing skill in that fight. Then afterwards, he beat former champion Krzysztof Glowacki to become a two-time world champion. He then beat Uniel Dorticus, a former champion himself, to pick up another belt. And as an old man, we've seen Bradis go toe-to-toe with Jai Opetaia, who was seen as the best in the division, and he gave him hell both times. So Bradis is a better win than Dwight Muhammad Kawi. Again, bigger, more skilled, and physically stronger. Plus, he was 100% in his prime. Then you have Murat Gassiev, who, again, is, I would say, maybe a bit better than Carlos de Leon, but he can't be the best win on Usyk's resume at cruiserweight simply because Gassiev has always had terrible footwork. Or maybe not terrible, but it's basic. So Usyk was able to pick him apart. But Gassiev did do a lot of good things in his career. He became more established, in my opinion, than the likes of Kawi and Ricky Parkey and Carlos de Leon when Usyk fought him, because this guy fought champions back to back to back. He beat Denis Lebedev, a very skilled Russian who had only lost one or two fights at that time. Long-time veteran, he beat him to become world champion. He defended it against Krzysztof Wlodarczyk, another former world champion, only lost one fight. He then became unified champion himself by defeating Uniel Dorticus, a prime undefeated Cuban knockout artist. Dorticus was a serious puncher at cruiserweight, and Gassiev knocked him out. So Gassiev did more, like I said, to become an established elite fighter in the division than guys like De Leon and Parky, who would lose a fight, win a title, lose it, and then win the same title back, but not fight the other champions. But because of his skill set, you could say he's on a similar level to those guys, maybe not quite as good as Briedis is on Usyk's resume. Then you've got Tony Bellew, who was a one-off champion at Cruiserweight, beat BJ Flores, who was a very skilled prime contender, but Tony Bellew was really an overachiever who never established himself as a true top 3 or even top 5, you could say, of the division, but he was still pretty skilled, and that was a very good win for Usyk because he slept him. So you could say that Tony Bellew was on a similar level to Ocasio and Henry Tillman, and maybe on a similar level to Ricky Parky. So in conclusion, Holyfield's 2 best wins, Dwight Muhammad Qawi and Carlos De Leon, are not as good as Usyk's 2 best wins, where, again, Maurice Briedis is more skilled, bigger, stronger, and more in his prime, and Briedis achieved more than Qawi did at Cruiserweight overall, and Murat Gassiev did more to establish himself as a unified champion and number 2 in the division than Carlos De Leon did, and for the time he was world champion, he beat a who's who of the other guys aside from Usyk. Then you've got Holyfield's other victories, which, again, aren't as good. Qawi in the rematch, Ocasio, Parky, and Henry Tillman. Usyk's win over Glavatsky is equal at worst to Holyfield's win over Parky, and Machunu is, again, similar level, maybe better than Ocasio and Tillman. Michael Hunter, certainly better than those guys. I would probably put him a little bit above Ricky Parky, and Tony Bellew on the same level as Parky, Tillman, and those guys, and Marco Hook was well past his best like Qawi was in the rematch. So in conclusion, Usyk's resume at Cruiserweight not only is a bit better than Evander Holyfield's, it is considerably better. It's deeper, he literally cleaned out the division, there was nobody else for him to fight who hadn't lost already, and he beat undefeated champion after undefeated champion after undefeated champion in their backyards. I mean, I'm going to be talking more in detail in other videos about just how impressive that is, but Usyk is very clearly the greatest cruiserweight in the history of boxing. How does he compare to the great heavyweights of the past? Well, that's for another video, but I hope you guys like this breakdown. Let me know what you guys think. How do you rank Usyk and compare him to the great cruiserweights that I've mentioned in this video? Like and subscribe. As always, catch you later.